thanks for everyone for joining myself and my Flow colleagues this morning. It's lovely to see that we've got a few people taking time out of their days to log on to this webinar about designing great learning experiences. I'm James McLuckie, and I could have posted a picture of myself in my raw lockdown truth, but I figured I'd spare you all that and show you one of me in my rather cuter days. I'm currently the Chief Learning Officer for Flow, and I'm sure a lot of people on here this morning are either Flow clients or are aware of Flow. But for those who don't, we provide software and learning solutions for the hospitality industry. My lovely team of colleagues and I provide the learning resources element of that. I've been working in digital learning now for the best part of 15 years. And prior to coming to Flow, I worked more in the leadership and management space. So working for hospitality is a bit of a change of scene for me, but it's been a lovely one so far, I'm pleased to say. Just a little bit about my background. I used to be on the board of the e-learning network, and I'm a judge chair of the Learning Technologies Awards. The idea of telling you that is not to brag, but it's so you hopefully get a sense that I've picked up a few hints and tips along the way that I'll share with you this morning. So here's what we're actually going to cover today. On today's menu, and I promise you this is the first and last hackney pun about hospitality that I'll make. But what I'd like to do first of all is I'm quite keen to find out a little bit more about you guys and who we've got with us this morning. Then I'll cover some learning design top tips, including 2 techniques you can start using pretty much straight away. We'll have a bit of fun next, and we'll talk about the 7 deadly sins of learning design. And I know a few people will be in a position where they're looking to convert content from face-to-face to online. So I'll give you some pointers of things to think about. Then what I'll do is I'll quickly run through some examples of where Flow content is headed. And then finally, if we've got time, we'll do a wrap-up and a Q&A. But please, if you do have questions throughout the chats, please do speak up at the time. Otherwise, either put it in the chat box, or if you prefer to speak, raise your hand, and either Laura or Leo, who are on the call with us today, or the webinar with us today, they'll be able to see, and they will invite you to unmute yourself, and we can have a conversation. But please don't make it just so it's just me talking at you for an hour, because even though I've got a rampant ego, I know that would be massively boring for everyone. So please do interact, make comments, ask questions. If anything provokes a thought in you, please do share it. It would be great to hear from you. So I hope that's the agenda that most people were expecting this morning. So I'd like to start in the spirit of getting you guys to interact with me and ask you a question for you, about you. Now, I'm sorry, the lake image was something I just added last night. I was thinking about what to use as a backdrop for the question. And I remember the face-to-face session I was a delegate at a few years ago, and the chap taking the course started off by saying, "Okay, everyone, let's take a swim in Lake U." And I thought he was taking the piss out of those self-help classes, but no, he was actually being deadly serious, and I don't think he actually appreciated my guffaws. Anyway, I'm quite curious to find out about your experiences of designing online learning. You might want to share your experience level. So if you're new to it, or you're reasonably advanced in designing online learning, or perhaps you might want to describe what it's been like for you to this point. Has it been exciting, challenging, or something you've been forced to do? And I'll point out that the techniques that I'm going to talk about today could be equally applied to face-to-face learning, but I've made the assumption that most people here are probably looking to do online learning in some capacity, hence why the question is about designing online learning. So if you've got, take a minute or two just to put something into the chat for me, or if you'd rather speak, as I said, Leo and Laura will invite you to actually have a conversation with me. But yeah, it would be great to hear from you. So I'll just give you a minute or two to put something into the chat. Okay, Leo, Laura, is any chat coming through in terms of people's experience?
Yep.
What have we got?
So far, Most of the people are saying that they are quite new to this.
Okay.
So newbies or novices. But Tracy said that she has designed and authored lots of compliance mandatory learning, but wanting to develop further.
Okay, perfect. Well, hopefully there'll be a lot for people to, and I've actually just worked out how to do it on my phone, which is good. Read the chat on my phone, so hopefully I won't have to rely on you guys too much after this. Great, so yeah, I can see that most people are novices or just learning from scratch, which is great. So hopefully there'll be quite a few things here for people to pick up from this session this morning. But you know, I can see there's a few experienced guys on here, Bethany, Joe, etc. So if you guys have any tips that you want to share with the rest of the participants this morning, please do share them in the chat facility. As I said, it'd be great if the people who have designed have got a more advanced learning experience design would like to share some stuff with the rest of the guys on the session this morning. That would be wonderful. So thanks for sharing. It's much appreciated that you all took part so actively there. That was just to get your fingers warmed up. There will be quite a few questions throughout the session. So as I said, please do engage with the chat. It would be great to hear from you, or any links or anything at all that you think would be worthwhile for the rest of the guys on the session to benefit from. Again, please do share them in the chat. That'd be great. So what I want to do is start off by sharing some techniques that you can actually start to apply to your learning design now. And I've selected these two because they're practical and they're rooted in common sense. Now, before we start that though, I want to take you to a place that we've all been to. I'm sure we've all sat in a face-to-face session where we've had this experience, where we're sat in a training room and the trainer starts with something like this. So by the end of this session, you will understand the organisation's absence management policy, know how to use the organisation's absence management policy, understand the consequences of not using the organisation's absence management policy now that you know how to use it, be longing for death. Now, I am very ashamed to say that I was that trainer once upon a time. When I started learning and development around 18 or so years ago, I was a classroom or face-to-face trainer for a bank. And I would put my delegates or prisoners, as is more accurate to call them, through an experience like this. And that's because I didn't really have any formal training on how to help people learn. So when I say that a lot of people here are novices, especially when it comes to online learning, I mean, don't panic. You know, you're actually here to learn from some of the mistakes that I've made, and we'll get to that part when we get to the 7 deadly sins of learning design. I mean, I literally got the job in learning and development because I was working in a bank, and someone somewhere said, you know, you've got a big mouth on you, you'll be quite good to stand up in front of people and talk to them. So I muddled through for a while, but then I realised I had to do something to get better at helping people to learn. But a lot of what I read was incredibly theoretical, and it seemed needlessly complicated. But then an angel appeared in the shape of a lady called Kathy Moore and her action mapping technique. Now, if you haven't heard of action mapping, and I'm guessing if quite a lot of you are new to online learning, you've probably not been using it. But I'm going to run through it with you in a minute or two. And the reason why this resonated with me is because it makes sense and it's rooted in common sense. And it's actually properly focused on performance. So it facilitates turning not knowing into practical doing. And because, you know, basically learning something is all very well, but it's transferring that learning into workplace performance that really matters. Now, we don't have time to do a proper action mapping session this morning, and you'll find out all about this great technique of Kathy's on her blog, which is on the address of which is on screen. But I wanted to run through it with you very quickly, just so you'll hopefully get a sense of how useful it could be to you when you're starting to put together your own learning solutions. So this is a course which is aimed at line managers to help reduce absence across the business. So action mapping is a 4-step process. And you start off by defining the outcome you want to achieve. So this is your success criteria. And the more measurable you can make this, the more specific you could make this, the better, because you've got something very clear and tangible to aim for. So for a course about absence management aimed at line managers, the metric or the outcome you might be aiming for is something like reduce absence across the business by 30%. So you've got a very clear goal in mind for the actual outcome of the resource itself. Step 2 is what must the learner do to actually affect that outcome? So what's the tangible steps you need to see learners doing in order to actually make that outcome? So what we do is we talk in terms of very practical language, very active verbs. We don't say things like knowledge or understanding like the learning outcomes I showed you earlier on there, because they're actually quite woolly concepts. What does knowledge and understanding actually look like? How do they manifest itself in the workplace so that you know that actual, purposeful action is happening? So what we're trying to do there is articulate that knowledge and understanding as something you want to be able to see your colleagues, your team members actually doing in the workplace to affect real business change. Step 3 is practice activities. So you're designing practical things that people can do to practice what they have to do. So I've got another question for you guys now. When designing practice activities, what do you think is the most important thing to focus on? And I know a couple of you have got, experience of action mapping, so I'd invite you not to answer this question. But the rest of you, when you're putting together some kind of, learning engagement, what do you think, what's the hook? What do you think will make it really resonate and make it purposeful for people? I'll give you a minute or two to put something into chat for me. Oh, don't all rush at once. Thanks, Jenke. Okay, lovely. So we've got making it relevant, engaging, interactive and fun. Real life examples, yeah, absolutely. We'll come to that in a second, Mary Lou. Yep. Yep, I'm agreeing with all of those things. The great thing, there's a lot of people talking about the relevancy, which we'll come to more directly later on in the session. But for me, the big thing is decision making. Because if you think about it, everything we do is a result of a decision. It's actually a decision of some kind, either consciously or unconsciously. So you guys all made the decision to come here this morning based on the information you were given. And when you're in a work situation, you make a choice to use a certain process or book a meeting with a colleague. And that might be a little bit more unconscious because the more competent you get, the more unconscious those decisions become. But it is still as a result of decision making at some level. So I would say when you're doing a practice activity, the main thing you're wanting people to actually practice is decisions they will make in the workplace in order for it to have genuine purpose when they apply it back to their tasks and activities. So if we go back to our action map, the practice activity we might then think about is decide on a course of action following analysis of team absence. So we decided the learner must be able to demonstrate articulating the impact of their own team's absence on the business. So the next course of action then be some kind of analysis exercise where they decide on a course of action based on that analysis. And the next thing then is step 4, the last step in an action map, is what's the minimum amount of information that you want people to, what's the minimum amount of information people need to know in order to undertake that practice activity. So where possible, what you're trying to do is stop your course becoming an information dump, because I'm not sure what people's experience of e-learning has been, but most of it is pretty wretched. Because you work with subject matter experts or an expert of some kind who insists that absolutely everything that they know has to go in the course, otherwise it's not valid. And as we know, that way courses can become, especially e-learning courses, can become quite bloated. So if what you do is the information, look at it and decide, you know what, it doesn't actually impact the practice activity, it's not going to help someone to practice the decision making, then it doesn't go in the course. So that way, if you go through this 4-step process of the outcome, what learner must do, then the activities, and then the minimum information they need to undertake that practice activity, it stops your course becoming that information dump, because it's a clear path through from the content right the way back through to the outcome. And you will find that your course or resource, whatever it is you build, will have more purpose that way. So this is just another step. So obviously, for this particular outcome here, it takes more than one thing in order to affect that change. So the next thing might be the learner has to hold a difficult conversation with direct reports to challenge the absence. And a practice activity for that could be role-playing a challenging conversation, and the minimum information that's needed for that could be things like logistical considerations, examples of open coaching questioning to get the right information from your direct report, and then maybe anger diffusing techniques in case things got a little bit heated. So, I mean, if anyone's got any comments on action mapping, or they think it's a good, seems like a good technique they can start using, please do share your thoughts in the chat. It'd be really good to read them. So if you're going to take one thing from this webinar, please, it's this: remember action mapping. I mean, I've told my family and friends that even if I get amnesia, don't bother me with all about the family names and addresses or any of that nonsense. Start with reteaching me action mapping, because it's held me in such good stead throughout my career. And one of the first things I did when I started at Flow was to introduce the technique to the learning design process. And the guys here, and I think a couple of them are on the call this morning, are all really enjoying using it because they can see the value of it. But I want to go back to the practice activity section of the action map and introduce a second technique. So when you're putting together your practice activities, it's well worth remembering this second very simple but very effective three-step technique. And it's called Absorb, Do, Connect. Now, absorb, step one. So if you think about it, you're maybe thinking about the role play that we've decided that we need the learner to do in order to hold difficult conversations with direct reports. So the absorb is where you set up the knowledge element of the activity, and it could be about, you know, absorbing new knowledge or refreshing existing knowledge. So in order to do that, you might get someone to read a paragraph, follow a diagram, or watch a video in order to set up the learning engagement. The next part is the do. So now you're going to set up the actual, the practical element of it. So this is where you help them turn that learning into performance by getting them to do something with the knowledge. So in this case, it was the role play. And then the final part, the connect, is what you're doing there is prompting them to apply this performance back to their own real world context. And this could be something very simple, like reflective questions, such as how will you apply this in your workplace? And what will you start doing differently now? So very simple, absorb, do, connect. And this was devised by a guy called William Horton. And my friend John Curran writes about it in more detail on his blog, which is on screen. If you'd like to take a look at it, he actually breaks this down into a bit more detail. And as I said, it's just a very, very simple technique to start thinking about your learning engagements or the interactions you build into your online learning, or any learning for that matter. As I said, we are getting, it's another stage to help people turn the knowledge part into practical doing, knowing into doing. So hope that resonates for you. Okay, so another question for you now. If learning is all about, you know, helping people to get from A to B, so essentially much of our job as learning designers is about establishing where learners currently are and where we need them to get to in order to have an impact. What barriers do you think there are that prevent your learners getting from where they are now to where they need to get to? So again, I'll just give you a couple of minutes just to put some ideas into the chat box. So Joe says time, Dan says fatigue. Yeah, I think we're all feeling that at the moment, Dan. Cost is one thing, yeah. Time, confidence, things locked into a learning management system that makes it hard to get to. Yeah, I think we've all been trapped in that maze before. Joe, too wrapped up in day-to-day tasks. Yes, that's definitely something I think we all face. A controversial one there from Lydia, which I won't say out loud. Support from leader. Yeah, thanks, Darrell. Jackie. Yeah. Jackie, not seeing the relevance to them, I absolutely agree with that. And, hopefully the action mapping technique helps with that because, as I said, you're starting with an outcome that affects business change and they can see how they impact that outcome by going through an activity based on it. Brian, attitude and willingness to learn, definitely. Here's some that I'm going to run through with you just very quickly because I'm just conscious of the time at the moment. So 6 barriers to learning success that have been identified is knowledge gaps. People don't know enough in order to get from, or we don't feed them enough to get them from A to B. So that obviously is a massive undertaking. And then the next one is the skills gap. So they might have the knowledge, but they might not have the practical skills in order to turn that knowledge into doing. And our job is to think about, how do we do that? How do we get that practical, skills-based, competency into our learning design? A third one is motivation gaps. I think it was Jackie mentioned that. If they can't see what's in it for them, they're very unlikely to engage with it, engage with the learning design. They have to understand the what's in it for me in order to do that. So that's not always a positive thing sometimes. Sometimes it could be showing the consequences of something if someone doesn't actually do something. So that's quite important in compliance where, sometimes the motivation levels there can be quite low, but if you actually show the consequences of not doing something or not taking something seriously, that can be enough of a motivator to get people to be engaged with your learning design. The next one's also quite important that people sometimes forget is habit gaps. And essentially what that is, that's kind of unlearning quite often bad habits. We quite often get into practices where, because it's the way we've always done it, we persist in doing it. And actually sometimes that's not the right way for various reasons. Maybe perhaps it wasn't the best way to start off with. Obviously we're aware that environments change, working practices change, new technology comes in. So if you're stuck in old ways of doing things or your learners are stuck in old ways of doing things, it can be quite hard sometimes to get them to unpick what they've always done. But it's very important to acknowledge that and to try and build that into your learning design. The next thing we have is environment gaps. And by that, what we mean is there could be some barriers in there, the physical barriers that prevent people from fully engaging with your learning process. A good example of that is, a few of you guys mentioned it earlier about the kind of time and getting wrapped up in your tasks. If you don't actually create the environment for yourself to sit down and kind of properly engage with the learning experience, is very unlikely to have the impact that it might have. And it could be also something quite simple like bandwidth issues. If someone's accessing your material via online means and you've got a big 150 megabyte video they have to stream and their internet connection is not up to it, that's also a major consideration. So it's something to think about when you're putting together certainly an online learning experience, is how will people be consuming your content and try and making it the best way, in the best format, for people to actually consume that. And the last one we've got here is communication gaps. So if you're not terribly clear with learners about what it is they're meant to be getting out of the experience, they might actually find it difficult to engage with it. Now, what I'm not suggesting is a whole bunch of the learning outcomes at the start of a learning experience. That's not what I mean, but it has to be quite clear about what's in it for them in terms of what are they meant to get from it. And you can set that up more successfully by, scenario design, where people can see a clear line between if I go through the scenario, practice my decision making, I get a result at the end of it, then I can apply that back to my workplace context, and I understand what it is that I'm meant to be doing when I go back to my tasks and activities. So I think being clear, having it clear in your learning design what people should be taking from it is also very important. What do people think about those barriers? Are those the kind of things that you would expect to have to think about when you're putting together a learning experience? And the reason why I ask that is because it's quite good to actually, when you're thinking about it, is to do a kind of an analysis based on those 6 gaps. because then at least that way you're thinking about, oh, what's going to prevent my learning design from being successful? So if you think about these 6 things, you can hopefully overcome some of the barriers that people might have in front of them. Be very difficult to overcome all 6, obviously, and actually there might be 2 or 3 different things for different people. But I think at least if you get into the habit of asking these questions in your learning design, you've got more of a chance of being successful, or certainly engaging more learners than not. So I can't take the credit for this list. This is a list that was identified by a lady called Julie Dirksen, who's written a book called Design for How People Learn, which I've, perhaps rather blasphemy, called it the Bible. I'd say this is a book I've kind of lived by probably for the last, 7 or 8 years, however long the book has been written for. I heard about it very soon after it was published. It is the second thing I would definitely encourage you to do after action mapping is to buy a copy of this book. It's been updated since it was originally published. What you're seeing there, I believe, is the second version of it. It's just full of very common sense techniques that you can apply to your learning design very, very quickly. It breaks down a lot of the myths about learning and really reframes them in a way which is incredibly purposeful. And as I said, it just makes sense basically when you read it. So I would encourage everyone to actually buy a copy of this book if you don't already have it. When I join a team, I always make sure that my team have got a copy of this book. And I've only joined Flow 3 months ago, and we're doing a book club based on design for how people learn. And I'm already seeing the value of that. So it definitely is something I would recommend that you guys buy. So let's have a little bit more fun with that, rather than me just talking at you. Let's have a look at, the 7 deadly sins of learning design. Now, bless me, Father, there are times in my career when I can say that I have made a complete arse of it. And I'm not ashamed to say that I've made a few mistakes in my career at all. Because making a mistake is one of the most powerful experiences we can have. I mean, you make a mistake once, you don't make it again, or so the theory goes, at least. So thinking about the classic 7 deadly sins, let's take them one by one. So sin 1, our first sin. So based on this image here, what do you think we're going to be talking about? I'll just let you put that your guesses into the chat there. Cute. Sloth indeed, yes. Sloth. I'm very glad no one said lust, which is great. So sloth could mean many things when it comes to learning design. And actually you guys have all got quite a few ideas here, all of which I think are very valid. Thanks for your contributions in the chat there. But for me, the mortal sin of sloth is not focusing on performance. And I'm not going to labour this point because I talked about it quite a bit when we talked about action mapping. But it is when you create or you work with very ambiguous or woolly learning outcomes, and it goes back to the laziness aspect. But as I said, we talked about it quite a bit when we discussed action mapping, but I couldn't not have it as one of my 7 deadly sins. But it's definitely something that we all have to think about. I think when I was getting my training as a learning designer, or training designer as it was called back then, we always focused on learning outcomes. But I'm a big advocate that performance outcomes is what we should be focusing on. It's about turning that learning into actual, what's going to make an impact in the business. So that's what I'd always encourage you to do. Just take it the next step from learning into performance. So sin 2, let's have a look at that. What do you think we're talking about here of the 7 deadly sins? Yeah, you're all very quick off the mark with this one. So greed, exactly. We're talking about greed here. And when it comes to greed in learning design, what kind of things do you think we might be talking about? Mary Lou's got saving resources, yeah. So keeping things to yourself, potentially. I think that's what you mean there, unless I've misunderstood you, sorry. Anything else you think that greed in learning design might be? Too much content, exactly. Yep, kind of. That's, yeah, Dan and Jackie, I'm pretty much in agreement with you there. How I framed it, though, is being trampled by subject matter experts. And this goes back to the information dump problem. It's about, as you guys have got absolutely being greedy with content. So everything must go into a course. And actually, that's not very helpful for learners, because if you overstuff a course or a module with content, they're far more likely to miss the important stuff that you need them to take from it. So, I'm not being disparaging about subject matter experts, but I think if you've worked in learning design either face to face or online for a while, you do often come up across that problem where because they have a lot of knowledge and information, they do insist that everything goes into the resource. And as I said, that way you're going to have a very bloated experience for your learners that they're probably not going to resonate with. So here's a couple of tips to work with subject matter experts. Basically, you have to be clear, even if it's just in your own head, that they are the expert when it comes to the content, but you're the expert when it comes to the learning design. So what it is your job to do is to basically turn that content and make it an engaging learning experience for them. And that's the thing to have in your head, have the learner in mind at all times. And hopefully the action mapping technique would help with that. So you can have a clear roles and responsibilities charter. The charter is actually quite a grand word, but perhaps at the start of the process, be clear about what your expectations are of the subject matter expert, and if you wanted to document them in some way, there's nothing wrong with doing that. So always be respectful, accept the feedback, and be firm and accept changes if there's an issue with accuracy. So if they're coming back to you and saying that factually is wrong, it's okay to change that, obviously. But what you can always do, if you're working to an agile learning design methodology where you're constantly iterating and constantly prototyping, you can always change design preferences. If someone says, I don't like that color or what have you, they can always be changed in future iterations. In the initial learning design, you're really focusing on getting the information right, the practice activities right, nailing down those outcomes and nailing down what the learner must do so that those conversations will have genuine purpose. Accept the fact sometimes you're going to disagree, but it's important to be respectful when those disagreements actually happen. And lastly, keep it simple. This is why I've been advocating using action mapping and Julie Dirkson's techniques, because that's what they do. They keep them nice and simple. And as I said, they root them in practical common sense. So if you're not over-engineering it, you're not using words like, calling yourself an instructional designer, talking about things like scaffolding, pedagogy, all these words that a lot of learning designers use between themselves. But if you start using them with people who it's not their job to know those words, then you're probably going to muddy the waters so much that it might become quite a frustrating process for them. So try and talk to people in very common, practical sense terms, because that way you would definitely get the best out of your relationship with your subject matter experts. Our next sin, and I'm not going to, just looking at the time, but let's do one more. Can you guess what this is? This one's probably slightly more tenuous. So what are the 7 deadly sins could we possibly be talking about here? Yeah, John, you've got it right. It's pride, yes. Pride coming before a fall and all that. And what do you think in terms of learning design? What could pride be referring to? Thanks, Ellie, for last. We're going to come to last. Don't you worry, darling. It'll be coming. Yeah, Tracy, throwing all the tricks, all flashy tricks into a course. Yep, that definitely could be it. Not listening to feedback, possibly, Joe. Yeah. As I said, just conscious of time, I'll just go through it now. So basically, for me, it's not telling the real story. So perhaps you've got it in your head what learners need to learn, or when you're trying to uncover the story, you don't ask the right questions because you're too proud to show that you don't already know the answers. Now, I've already mentioned Julie Dirkson's book, Design for How People Learn, and one of the stories that she told in her book really resonated with me. And she was working on a drug prevention course for youths, and the course was going down the route of drugs are bad, don't take them. But Julie knew that wasn't actually the real story, because everyone knows, of course, that drugs are bad. You shouldn't take them. But the real problem actually is for teenagers was how to overcome peer pressure. They needed to be armed with tools on how to say no and not lose face in front of their peers. So, basically by really digging down and finding out, what, we're not going to solve the right problem here if we go down this drugs are bad route, because it's not actually what the challenge is. That's not what the challenge, what the youths are facing here. So you could relate that back to the absence management course example I gave you, at the start of the session. If you're designing an absence management course, are you really going to make someone sit down and go through the absence management process, how to log absence, all those kinds of things? Because that's probably not going to have much of an impact on the business. What's probably more likely the problem is that managers don't have the courage to challenge perennial absentee people. So people who call in sick on a Monday or a Friday, and they regularly do that, by challenging that kind of behaviour or by investigating that kind of behaviour, you're far more likely to have that business impact rather than going through an absence management policy. So having that mindset of a journalist and actually asking questions and being curious is vitally important there. I'm going to go through these quite quickly. So sin 4, have a think to yourself quickly what that could be. Gluttony. And actually this goes back to a couple of things we've been saying here about, trying to overstuff our courses. But for me, it's thinking you can take on the world with an e-learning course, basically trying to get it to do too much, because there's only so much that any piece of learning can do, and certainly a piece of online content, which generally is consumed, quite quickly. There is only so much that it can do. So, for me, the main thing it will succeed in doing is if you can get someone to practice something, you give someone the confidence to try something at the end of it. I think if you've managed to accomplish that, then you've done pretty well. Sin 5 is, again, have a quick think to yourself what it could be. Envy. For me, envy is losing sight of what makes a great learning designer. Now, this is something I just want to have a quick chat about, what are the core skills that it takes to be a great learning designer. And for me, it's, don't order take. Firstly, you're not a waiter. So if people are dictating to you what has to go in a course and you don't challenge it, especially if you don't agree with it, then you need to get into the mindset of perhaps pushing back and saying, does this actually have value? Is it actually going to make a difference to the business? Will it resonate with the learner? Does it feel authentic? Ask all those questions, and don't be afraid to push back if you're not happy about what's going into something. Adopt a problem-solving mentality. Quite often you're there to solve something, some kind of problem, some kind of challenges to be overcome. There has to be a reason why the course or the resource, whatever it is you decide to build, there has to be a purpose behind it. So what I'd always do is have that kind of investigative mindset there. You're there to try and solve some kind of issue or help with some kind of issue. So just have that in mind. You've got to develop the hide of a rhino. And this goes back to, I guess, to the problem solving and then the don't order take. You do have to quite often, adopt a stance of you're challenging, you're asking questions when people don't want to be asked questions, or perhaps you're asking uncomfortable questions. So having that, as I said, the courage, your own courage to ask the questions, to dig a bit deeper, and to not have an ego to do so, that's a definite skill. And to be honest with you, I do appreciate it's one that takes a bit of time, quite often to develop. But a former colleague of mine, Ross Garner, said that what he considers himself to be is usefully ignorant. And when you have that perspective on your own role in the learning design process, then that's quite a healthy position to take. Quite often you have to have the courage to fail, not just you, but also your team as well. So perhaps you're heading up a team of learning designers, or you're working with colleagues, you're all part of a team. So experiment, try things out. An idea might seem crazy, but will it try any harm? Is it going to cause any harm to actually do it? Probably not. So if you don't think it's going to do any harm, try it out, fail fast, fail quickly, learn from it, and then move on. As I said, the 7 deadly sins is all about the mistakes that I've made in the past. So I've learned from them, and hopefully become a better learning designer as a result of them. So as I said, the thing a lot of people miss sometimes is to have fun with the learning design. So I would definitely encourage you all to do that. And the last thing that I think is really important for a learning designer to be is endlessly curious. Asking questions, not just when it comes to creating learning content, but have a look and see what's going on in the wider industry. Join networks on Twitter or LinkedIn. How are other people approaching problems that you probably will have to find a solution to? Get involved in conversations, with your your learning design peers. There's a few people on this chat today that I recognize from my own personal learning network. So as I said, it's tremendously beneficial to have that curiosity mindset. So definitely exploit that and ask questions of your network. Is there anything you guys think I might have missed at all there? Any kind of skills or particular things that you think would make a great learning designer or makes a great learning designer? Or you personally think I know I'm a great learning designer because I do this. And again, just put it in the chat. Have fun, yeah. Thank you, unknown user. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's something we miss quite often, is to have a bit of just have a bit of playful mindset is always really helpful when it comes to these things. Creativity, yeah, definitely done. Daniel, I think that's absolutely a key to it as well. Thinking about new ways of doing things is always really important. Technical skills for online content design. That's always really important, Jackie, to at least know what's, I'd say personally, what's possible. Whether you have to have the technical skills yourself personally to do things, I guess that depends on your individual circumstances. If you don't have, for example, the budget for a big team and you have to do it yourself, then absolutely. But I'm quite fortunate at the moment to work with a slightly larger team who have got individual skills. For me personally, it's all about knowing their potential and what's possible. But certainly in the past, I've worked just myself building e-learning courses, and yes, it's very important that I push myself technically to basically we talked about creativity there, to realize some of those creative ideas, definitely. Okay, sin 6 then. So I'm just going to use quickly, and this one is, I'm sure there's only 2 left. I'm sure you probably all guessed that this is wrath. And for me, this is where the links start to become a little bit more tenuous, but designing poor assessments. So, what I'd recommend you always do when you're putting assessments together is think about formative, not just summative assessments. Now, by formative assessment, what I mean is assessment for learning. So it's not just spoon feeding people information saying this is bad, this is good, this is what you should do. It's actually wrapping it into some kind of assessment where it's not flagging assessment that's happening here, but it's getting people to find the answer for themselves. So perhaps you set up a scenario and you ask some coaching questions. So it could be something like, difficult conversation scenario we spoke about earlier. This is a question that you could ask at this stage to diffuse anger. Which one would you pick? And then you see a response based on the option that you picked. But so you've set up the scenario successfully in the absorb, you've got them to do it, and then at the end when you give them the feedback, you help them to connect that back to their real world practice. So you're not telling someone the answer, you're getting them to reach for it themselves, and that's what formative assessment does very well. And what I would say as well is don't put tests in there just for the sake of it. I understand for compliance reasons and what have you, quite often you do have to have tests in there. But I would very strongly advocate that you don't just put an assessment in there just because you feel you have to have a test at the end of it, because it's very unlikely that it's going to make any difference to the learning experience or what the learner then does in the workplace. And our last one then is best for last. Ellie, we got there in the end. So for me, and some of you mentioned this when it came to greed and gluttony, but it is about being seduced by shiny objects. So being seduced by the latest fad or using technology just because you can. So VR this, virtual reality this, gamify that. I went through a phase where everything had to be an animation just because it was great fun for me to come up with creative concepts and ideas. But when I think back to all the animations and things I've done in the past, quite often it was probably the wrong way to go. So you really want to avoid your learners feeling like this little guy, and this is when I show my age quite a bit here. So it hopefully doesn't age me too much, but this is Gizmo from Gremlins, and he had an aversion to bright lights. And sometimes that's what we can do to our learners if we get them to focus on, keeping us. If the focus is on keeping ourselves entertained, rather than helping them get to where they need to be. So a few tips then just to help you control that lust and trying, using media when it's not actually, the best way of doing it. Thank you, Joe, for that. Nice to see Gizmo animated there. So the learning, remember, start with the outcomes. Always go through something like action mapping to determine what impact the business needs to happen and what the learners need to do to affect that. And the media you select needs to work for that and not the other way around. Sometimes all you need is a checklist. The humble checklist might not be sexy, but it can be all powerful. I used to give a former sales director heart attacks because we'd be sat in client meetings and they had the client had £20,000 to spend on video or something, and after a bit of a scoping chat, I'd say, do you know what? Videos are not going to work here. All you need here is a few job aids and templates. So that 20 grand would be reduced to £50. Sorry, Ellie, if you're still here, that's probably going to give you a heart attack now. But if it's about doing what's best for the outcomes, then so be it. And you can use that £20,000 on something which is genuinely going to impact and affect business change. And finally, your 6 other sins will help you in your carnal pursuits. They're your own checkpoint to keep you on track to hopefully design great learning experiences. So just to very quickly recap, the 7 deadly signs of learning design have been these here. I said they've hopefully resonated with you in some way. And it's just another way of looking at, what makes a good learning designer is to try and avoid these things. And certainly I have made these mistakes in the past myself. Do they all make sense to people? Is there anything you think I've missed there that you think I should add to that list and come up with the 8 deadly sins of learning design? Excellent. Thank you, Daniel, for that. Right, we've only got 9 minutes left, so I'll very quickly go through this next part here, which is, because I think this will be quite relevant for some people. From face-to-face to online learning. So these are 10 top tips for online conversion. If you're sitting here with a bunch of content that you have to put into an online experience, then these are the things these are the 10 things I think you should remember. 1, please don't just convert a PowerPoint. I've seen that done many a times. If run through a rapid authoring tool like Storyline or Captivate or something like that, we put a multiple choice quiz at the end of it, and that is considered to be e-learning, and it's not. It is a thoroughly wretched experience to put any learner through. So please do sit down and have a think about, put yourself in the learner's position and say, okay, would I get what I need the learner to get from this, or the individual to get from this? Will they get it if they sit through 60 screens and then sit a test at the end? The answer very likely is no. So think about what it feels like to consume it from an online perspective and make the adjustments that way. Think about resources, not just courses. Actually, is an e-learning resource the right way to do it? It might just be a short video accomplishes the same thing. Quite often it would accomplish something better. So, you know, if you've got an iPhone, ask some of your colleagues. I know a lot of us are isolated at the moment, but maybe ask them to share some stories, record them on their phones, and then you can put them onto some kind of resource like SharePoint or whatever your intranet is. Where people are talking about a problem they solved and how they've accomplished that. It might be an infographics, a better way of doing it. If you've got anyone in-house who can pull together a decent looking infographic, that might be a better way of accomplishing something. So just have a think about, you know, is a formal course the right way to go? Because quite often something a bit more short and sharp is a better way of doing it. Try and avoid, if you do an e-learning course, try and avoid the curse of click next, because psychologically all that really encourages people to do is just to keep, you know, pressing next through screens. So, you know, if you have to have a button that puts someone that someone has to press to get to the next screen, try and build it in such a way that what it actually does is sets up the narrative. So rather than next, something like help Donna to make a decision. At least that way you're building something which has a bit of structure to it and is helping to prompt someone, okay, when I go into the next screen here, this is what I have to do. So I say try and avoid that kind of next experience. One thing people seem to think is you have to spend a fortune on e-learning when you build a course, and quite often you don't. I mentioned an iPhone earlier there. Now I've seen, you know, people doing video shoots with camera crews and what have you, and I'm certainly not saying that those things don't have their place. But when you think about a lot of e-learning courses and how people consume them, you know, if you have a great looking video, is going to be compressed quite often down so that people can consume it via online means or perhaps on 4G or what have you. So that kind of big budget production will probably not look that great when it's squashed down to an iPhone. So actually just recording something on your smartphone probably will be just as effective than spending a lot of money on something. And that's just one example of why you don't have to spend a lot of cash on things. Use scenarios, you know, please. I mean, they really do help. And a lot of you guys mentioned it earlier about, you know, using scenarios, things that are authentic to what the person is going to actually be doing on the job or their own context is always incredibly powerful because it gets people to think about the learning points related to what they're doing. Introduce interactive or thinking elements. Try not to make it too passive. Get them to think through things. You know, get them to try things out. All these kinds of things definitely help with engagement. You know, allow learners to explore the content freely. I've seen a lot of e-learning experiences where your sections are locked down. You can't move from one to the other until you've completed a previous section. You know, I always try and open up my courses as much as possible to allow people to give them the choice to actually go to the sections they want in the order that they have to. Now, I do appreciate for compliance reasons, sometimes that isn't possible, but you know, if you do have the option of allowing people to explore your content freely, I would always advise that you do that. And just related to that is bite-sized. Do try and chunk down your content as much as possible, and hopefully the action mapping technique would help with that. So if you have quite a lot of content to get through, once you've hopefully filtered it down by using action mapping, chunk in terms of how you present it to learners, chunk it down so it's not big bloated sections. It's very short sections, and one technique I use for that is relate it back to the action map, what the learner must do. So each section of a course is related to that particular task or activity, and then at least that way, when someone's going through it, again, hopefully it helps create a sense of purpose as to why they're actually doing that. Think about mobile. A lot of our learners now will be consuming your content on a mobile, and that's why it's really important to do the bite-sized approach to it as well. People will not have either the time or the inclination to go through big 1 hour long courses on a mobile. So the more you can have it really focused, the better. And lastly, put yourself in the learner's position. So essentially, when you're putting together an online learning resource or you're converting online content, think of it from the learner's position. Are you going to, would you want to go through these yourself, I guess is the question to ask. And would you get from this what needs to happen to affect real business change? And if the answer to that is no, I would suggest you go back and start that again. We're almost out of time, actually. I'm just very conscious. Does anyone have any questions at this stage? I'll just go on to this part here, and then we can, for anyone who wants to hang around, I can do a quick session on a very quick show where Flo's content is going to go. But if anyone's got any questions at this stage, and I'll go through the chat afterwards. If anyone's asked anything that I've missed, I'll try and follow up with you to give you an answer on that. I'll just give you a minute or two to put any questions in there. And just while we're doing that, if you just bear with, I'm just going to bring up. Hopefully you guys can still see my screen here. So just to finish off then, I was just going to show you an example of a course that we're developing at Flow just now. That just hopefully kind of demonstrates some of the things I was talking about. And this is a resource called 4 Ways to Build Revenue, which is part of the suite of modules we're building to help businesses in the hospitality industry get back on their feet after the pandemic, or when they're allowed to open again freely. And this goes back to setting up the learning right from the start. We're getting people to think about, some of the content before they actually press play on the actual course itself. We jump into the module. It's fully responsive. If I push that, readjust that, you can see the real estate on the screen adjusts itself to the screen. We've chunked it down. So, all the sections make sense. If I go in there, a section attracting new customers, I know what I'm getting. So there's no surprises when I go into that. If I press view here, we've tried to make it feel more like a modern web experience rather than the kind of click next. So it feels a little bit more like, how people are consuming content by scrolling, on the page. Because obviously people now are used to things like Facebook, Instagram, etc. For actually consuming content. So we've kind of adopted that approach. We've tried to be quite creative, by the way, with the way we've actually presented some of this information. So there's animations here. There's obviously a lot of music and sound effects, which I've switched off just now. Trying to be very accessible. There's closed captions for our hearing impaired learners, and also if someone can't access can't access a set of headphones. Some reflective questions here, so rather than spoon feeding people the answers, we get them to think about it from themselves. This is my idea, which they can save and download as a PDF. And as I said, we've just tried to make it a little bit more varied in terms of the types of interactions that people have as they go through the resource. So this is for any Flow clients, this is a resource we'll be making available for free over the next week or so. So please do look out for that. Your customer account manager will be in touch with you to talk to you about when that will arrive in your platform. There it is. So Ian, is that easy to do in your own designs? It can, depending on the authoring tool you use, Ian. Yes, it should be. There's lots of responsive design tools out there now, which and some of the more classic e-learning authoring tools like Storyline or Captivate. It's just a case of changing the size of the screen, and you should hopefully be able to achieve a very similar scrolling effect as we've accomplished here. But very happy to talk to you offline, Ian, about how you can actually accomplish that. I'll just go back to my PowerPoint slide here. Here is my details. Please do keep in touch So I'm very aware of taking over 11 o'clock now. My apologies for that. You know, if anyone's got any questions at all, I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out to me there. Send me a tweet or follow me on Twitter and send me a private message. Again, very happy to chat to you on there as well. So thank you very much, guys, for joining me this afternoon. I hope it was useful in some way. And I look forward to hopefully connecting with some of you on the social media platforms. So thank you very much for your time this